You can't plan that. You hope it happens between actors, but it doesn't always.
Tony Randall was known for being polished, respectful, and completely devoted to his craft. But there is one name that never came up again after The Odd Couple ended: Brett Somers. The silence was deafening, and now we know why. What happened behind the scenes shocked those closest to him and explains the decades-long grudge that fans never saw coming. Tony Randall was never the kind of actor to chase controversy. In fact, he seemed to run from it. Known for his razor-sharp timing, buttoned-up elegance, and an unmistakable air of sophistication, Randall carved out a career that stood in stark contrast to the chaos and scandal that often surrounded Hollywood. Whether on stage in a Neil Simon play or delivering a wry one-liner on a late-night talk show, Randall brought an old-school sensibility that made him feel more like a refined New York intellectual than a television comedian. He was not just admired, he was respected. And in an industry where personal drama often grabs headlines faster than talent, Randall made it a point to stay above the noise. From the 1950s through the early 2000s, Tony Randall was a fixture of American entertainment. He became a household name thanks to a string of successful television roles, film appearances, and countless game show panels. But it was The Odd Couple that truly immortalized him. His portrayal of Felix Unger, the neurotic neat freak foil to Jack Klugman's gruff Oscar Madison, became iconic. Randall did not just play Felix. He was Felix, or at least that is how fans saw it. The obsessive tidiness, the dramatic flair, the fastidious way of speaking, it was hard to separate the character from the man, and that was part of the appeal. Despite his fame, Randall was deeply private. He avoided tabloids, rarely indulged in gossip, and was known for treating his co-stars and crew with professionalism. He carried himself with the type of composure that made scandal feel almost impossible. Even in the high-pressure world of television, Randall's reputation remained remarkably unblemished. There were no screaming fits on set, no bitter feuds played out in the press, no personal meltdowns exposed to the world. If something bothered him, he kept it behind closed doors. This spotless image made what happened later so baffling. Because when The Odd Couple ended and Randall went on to other projects, fans noticed that one familiar face had quietly vanished from his orbit. Brett Somers, the wisecracking actress who frequently appeared on The Odd Couple and was known for her sharp tongue on shows like Match Game, seemed to be completely erased from Randall's life. No reunions, no interviews together, not even a passing mention. For someone like Randall, who had worked so closely with her for years, to completely sever ties without explanation was not just uncharacteristic, it was chilling. At first, fans chalked it up to a natural drifting apart. Hollywood is full of temporary friendships and on-screen chemistry that fades once the cameras stop rolling. But as the years went on, and Randall stayed consistently silent on the subject, the mystery deepened. People who knew him began to hint that this was not just a matter of growing apart. Something had happened, something that shook Randall enough to erase a person from his life completely. And given how rarely he took offense, whatever it was had to be deeply personal. What made it even more surprising was who Brett Somers was to Randall's world. She was not just a random co-star, she was married to his television partner, Jack Klugman. She had been part of that circle, someone viewers saw laughing and joking with Randall on set and on panel shows. Her presence was practically an extension of The Odd Couple universe. So for Randall to ice her out without a word, that was the first crack in the perfect image. A quiet but unmistakable sign that behind the curtain of calm, something had gone terribly wrong. And that crack would only grow wider as whispers began to circulate. By the time The Odd Couple hit television screens in 1970, Tony Randall and Jack Klugman were already seasoned actors. But this show would cement them as one of the most iconic duos in sitcom history. Randall's portrayal of the neurotic, immaculately clean Felix Unger, alongside Klugman's slobby, no-nonsense Oscar Madison, struck a perfect comedic balance that audiences could not get enough of. Their chemistry felt effortless, and fans quickly believed that the friendship they saw on screen extended into real life. What many did not realize, though, was how closely that illusion blurred with reality, and how much it would matter later. The show was adapted from Neil Simon's play, But Randall and Klugman brought a unique rhythm to the roles that felt fresh, even as the sitcom formula started to wear thin on other shows. Week after week, they turned something as simple as an argument over vacuuming or a ruined poker night into television gold. Behind the scenes, the two actors developed a close working relationship built on mutual respect. But there was a third presence on set, who, while not always in the spotlight, played a larger role than fans realized: Brett Somers. Brett Somers was more than just a recurring guest on The Odd Couple. She was Jack Klugman's real-life wife, and a well-known television personality in her own right. Her character, Blanche Madison, Oscar's ex-wife, appeared in multiple episodes, often adding an extra layer of tension and comedy. But her involvement with the show extended beyond the script. Somers was a staple on game shows like Match Game, known for her wit, sharp tongue, and unfiltered commentary. She was the kind of person who could dominate a room with a single joke, and she often did. Randall and Somers crossed paths frequently. Not only did they share scenes on The Odd Couple, but they also appeared together on panel shows, talk shows, and even charity events. Publicly, they seemed like a friendly, bickering duo. Randall playing the straight man to Somers' wild card. Their back-and-forth banter delighted audiences. She teased him about being uptight. He rolled his eyes and shot back with dry humor. It was an act that seemed harmless until it was not. While cameras captured playful sparring, insiders started to notice a shift. Off-screen, the warmth between Randall and Somers began to cool. Crew members recalled that Randall, typically generous and gracious with co-stars, would grow distant when Somers was around. At first, it was subtle: skipped after-show dinners, shorter conversations, and less eye contact during rehearsal. But over time, it became clear that the relationship was strained, and no one knew exactly why. What made things more complicated was Somers' unique position. Because she was married to Klugman, she occupied a space that blurred professional and personal boundaries. Her presence on set was not just as an actress, it was as the spouse of Randall's closest co-star. That meant she was privy to behind-the-scenes dynamics, private conversations, and cast camaraderie that few others were allowed into. When someone that close starts turning cold, it does not just feel like distance, it feels like betrayal. The tension did not make headlines at the time. Back then, Hollywood operated under an unspoken code of silence. Problems were handled quietly, and stars were expected to keep their grievances out of the press. Randall, ever the gentleman, never said a word publicly. Somers, on the other hand, had a different style. Her humor had bite, and although most of her remarks were brushed off as jokes, some began to wonder if her public jabs were masking something deeper, something Randall could no longer laugh off. What looked like a comedic partnership to the audience may have been quietly unraveling behind the scenes. And while fans kept tuning in for more Felix and Oscar antics, something far more personal was boiling just beneath the surface. It all built up to one moment, a moment that would push Tony Randall to his limit and mark the end of a friendship he had never publicly acknowledged in the first place. In the world of 1970s television, roasts were a brutal kind of comedy blood sport. The Friars Club roasts, in particular, were infamous for crossing the line, because there was no line. Nothing was off limits, no insult too personal, no story too sacred. For most comedians, it was all part of the game. But for Tony Randall, that game ended the night Brett Somers took the mic. The roast in question has become something of a legend, hard to find in full, whispered about in memoirs and green rooms, but never aired in its entirety. It was supposed to be a light-hearted tribute to the Odd Couple era, filled with inside jokes and affectionate barbs. Randall, ever the professional, was in attendance. He had likely braced himself for a few jabs at his prim and proper screen persona. What he did not expect was betrayal, dressed as humor. When Brett Somers stepped up, the tone shifted. She was known for her razor wit and whiskey-drenched voice, and the crowd was ready for fireworks. But what followed was more than comedy. It was exposure. Somers began recounting stories from the Odd Couple set, but these were not harmless anecdotes. According to those in the room, she spoke about Randall's insecurities as an actor, mocking his obsessive rehearsing, his need for control, and his tendency to redo scenes long after everyone else was satisfied. She painted him as neurotic, not just on screen, but in real life, obsessed with how he was perceived, constantly second-guessing himself, even breaking down privately when scenes did not land perfectly. For someone as reserved and image-conscious as Randall, hearing those stories in public must have felt like having having the curtain ripped off mid-performance. The room laughed, but Randall did not. Worse still, Summers allegedly made offhand comments that cut deeper than professional ribbing. She joked about Randall's personal life, something he fiercely protected. Whether it was intentional or not, her roast had stepped far beyond industry banter and into deeply personal territory. Friends sitting near Randall said his face froze. Others claimed he walked out before the roast ended. The man who had built a career on composure looked shell-shocked. Those who knew Randall best said the roast changed everything. He was not one to lash out or create scenes, but he did believe in boundaries. And for him, Summers had crossed one too many. That night became the turning point, the moment he made a silent, irreversible decision. He would not confront her, he would not respond publicly, but he would never speak to her again. It was not just about the roast. That was simply the final blow in a series of frustrations Randall had quietly tolerated for years. Her on-air jabs, her unpredictable behavior, and her growing habit of turning private moments into public jokes. It all added up. But the roast turned private humiliation into public spectacle. And that was something Randall could not forgive. Industry insiders who had attended the event were stunned. Most assumed Randall would brush it off, laugh along, as so many had before him. But they underestimated just how deeply he valued his privacy. To him, acting was sacred, his image carefully curated, his dignity non-negotiable. And in one night, with a few jokes, Brett Summers had shattered all that in front of their peers. After the roast, Randall withdrew from any projects or appearances involving Summers. Invitations declined, requests ignored, events skipped. There was no statement, no explanation, just a growing wall of silence. And while Summers continued to joke about her time on The Odd Couple, Randall never mentioned her again. To the public, it seemed like nothing had happened. But to those who had been in that room, the message was clear. She had gone too far. And as the years went on, that silence became louder than any headline. After the roast, Tony Randall did what he always did. He kept it quiet. But behind the scenes, everything changed. Brett Summers, once a recurring figure in his professional circle, vanished completely from his orbit. There were no more joint appearances, no backstage photos, and no collaborative projects. The man known for his composure simply shut the door and never opened it again. To most people, Randall's silence looked like nothing at all. He never addressed what happened, never hinted at any grudge. But to those close to him, the shift was impossible to ignore. Industry insiders noted how he began turning down interviews if Summers was involved, avoiding events she might attend, and even declining tributes that mentioned her name. He did not rage. He just disappeared from her world. Randall's approach was strategic. By refusing to acknowledge the incident, he denied it further power. But make no mistake, it was not forgiveness. It was control. He chose silence as a form of retaliation, removing Summers from his professional narrative altogether. For someone as calculated and image-conscious as Randall, that kind of erasure spoke volumes. Brett Summers, for her part, never apologized publicly. In fact, she continued joking about the roast and her time on The Odd Couple as if nothing had happened. But Randall never joined in. Even during interviews where their shared history came up, he sidestepped any mention of her. It was as if she had been edited out of the story entirely. And that made fans curious. Why had these two performers, who shared such electric chemistry on screen, never reunited? Why were there no nostalgic interviews, no mutual tributes, no photo ops decades later? The silence grew louder with time, becoming a mystery fans could not explain, until now. Because Randall's silence was not absence. It was intentional, and it sent a clear message to anyone paying close enough attention. While Tony Randall remained silent publicly, those in his inner circle began to speak more freely over the years. Quiet conversations with friends, off-the-record remarks to journalists, and anecdotes from former colleagues all began to piece together a different story. One that confirmed the grudge was real and deeply personal. According to people who worked closely with Randall, the roast was not an isolated incident. It was the final final spark in a long, simmering tension that had been building for years. Brett Somers, known for her sharp wit and no-filter humor, had a habit of crossing lines. What she saw as jokes, Randall often saw as digs, remarks that chipped away at his privacy, professionalism, and dignity. One longtime friend recalled Randall saying that Somers made the personal feel performative. She had a way of turning private quirks into punchlines. Even when the cameras were off, the jokes did not stop. He reportedly felt like she used their shared moments for material, without ever considering how deeply those words could cut. And for a man like Randall, who prided himself on controlling his image and carefully managing how much of himself he gave to the public, that kind of exposure felt like a betrayal. Another colleague described how Randall became guarded whenever Somers was in the room. He would speak less, retreat more, and make polite exits as soon as filming wrapped. It was not dramatic, but it was unmistakable. He was pulling away. According to them, his trust in her had been eroded piece by piece, until there was nothing left to salvage. Some speculated that the tension was rooted not just in personality clashes, but in competing values. Randall was meticulous, disciplined, and deeply serious about the craft of acting. Somers, on the other hand, thrived in the chaos of live television and unscripted comedy. She loved to shock, to provoke. That contrast made their on-screen interactions dynamic, but off-screen, it created friction that never fully resolved. Others pointed out the awkward triangle at play. As Jack Klugman's wife, Somers was deeply embedded in Randall's world. He could not simply walk away without also distancing himself from Klugman, his longtime friend and collaborator. That may be why Randall tolerated so much for so long, until the roast gave him the excuse he needed to cut ties for good. Interestingly, Klugman never publicly commented on the rift. Whether out of loyalty to both parties or discomfort with the situation, he stayed neutral. But even that silence added to the mystery. It suggested that whatever had happened was serious enough to remain unresolved, even among friends. Over time, as retrospectives and documentaries looked back on the odd couple, more people began to notice the absence. Why was Brett Somers not included in reunions? Why did Randall, always so gracious with former co-stars, avoid even mentioning her? It was a deliberate omission, one that fans could not explain until those close to him began confirming what had long been suspected. Randall never lashed out, never held a press conference, never aired grievances, but those who knew him understood that his silence was the message. The more Somers joked about their past, the more he buried it. And with each passing year, the distance between them grew, until it was no longer just emotional, it was historical. Their story became a cautionary tale in the entertainment world, a reminder that not every feud explodes in public. Some unfold slowly, quietly, with no dramatic blowout, just a deep, private decision never to let someone back in. And once Randall made that decision, he never looked back. When Tony Randall passed away in 2004, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Co-stars, directors, and friends celebrated his brilliance, his elegance, and his deep love for the theater. But one name was conspicuously quiet in the coverage: Brett Somers. She offered a brief, respectful comment through a representative, calling Randall a one-of-a-kind performer. But it was vague, lacking the warmth and detail that usually come from a shared history. And just like that, their complicated connection was quietly buried, just as Randall had intended. Over the years, fans remained puzzled. Why had two performers with such rich chemistry and shared success simply gone separate ways, without explanation? In an era of endless reunion specials and nostalgia-driven interviews, Randall and Somers never stood side by side again. And the silence became its own kind of statement. It was only after Somers passed away in 2007 that pieces of the puzzle began to surface. Crew members, former panel show regulars, and friends who had held their tongues began to speak more freely. Old interviews were re-examined, offhand comments reinterpreted. What had once seemed like a casual professional drift now looked more like a deliberate removal, and in hindsight, it all finally made sense. The heart of it was not a dramatic confrontation or a headline-grabbing scandal. It was more human and more relatable. Randall felt betrayed. He felt exposed exposed by someone he once worked closely with, someone who knew exactly where the line was and crossed it anyway. And instead of fighting back, he did what many people wish they had the strength to do. He walked away and never looked back. There is a strange kind of power in that. In a world that thrives on drama and public fallout, Tony Randall's quiet refusal to give the story oxygen made it even more haunting. His silence created a gap in the narrative, a blank space where a friendship should have been. And that space made people ask questions for decades. Today, the legacy of The Odd Couple still shines. The show remains a classic. Randall and Klugman's performances endlessly rewatched by generations who never saw it live. But buried beneath the laugh tracks and perfectly timed punchlines is a real-life story of boundaries, betrayal, and silence. A reminder that even the most polished personas have limits, and even the most controlled lives can be shaken by one unexpected blow. In the end, Randall never spoke about Brett Somers again. Not in interviews, not in memoirs, not even in passing. She became a ghost in his story, present in the footage, erased from the memories. And in doing so, he sent a message louder than any argument could have. Some betrayals do not need an audience. They just need to be remembered and left behind. Because for Tony Randall, dignity always came first, even when it cost him a friendship, even when it meant rewriting history.